All right, good morning. I'm going to go over a presentation with you guys about how to make paper at home and the steps it takes and some of the terminology and stuff like that. You do have to watch this video to get some answers to your um, worksheet that I gave you. So make sure you pay close attention to this in order to get your answers. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the terms, and then step one of the process of making paper. Then step two, make the pulp. Three, pour the pulp. Step four is couch the sheet. Five is use a sponge. Six is dry the paper. Seven is variation one, which is the shapes of the paper you can make. And then step eight is variation two, which is embedded items that you can add to the paper. So just the glossary, a couple things. Mold and decal, just in a short description. The mold is the top. The mold is the bottom portion of the frame, and the decal is the upper portion of the frame. And again, decal also means like ragged edges. So when you're using the top portion, you would see that the when you pull your paper apart, you're going to have some rough edges on the top. Couching the sheet is the process of transferring the wet sheet from the mold to another surface. Felts, this is material that you're going to use to put the wet paper on. This is something that you would use to help dry it. You want to use something that doesn't have a lot of texture to it, because when you put the wet paper on it, it will pick up whatever texture is on the bottom. Pulp obviously is the mixture of water and plant fibers. Now, in my case, when I did this, I used paper, so it's tree fiber typically. And you can, when you do this, if you try to do this at home on your own, I initially, the first time I did this, I used just copy paper, ripped it up, and you'll see that. And the second time I did it, I actually used old newspaper, so the color was a lot different, obviously, because copy paper is just straight up white, and whereas the newspaper, once you blend it, it picks up the ink color and stuff like that. So interesting thing to do. So step one, you're going to build the mold. It's called the pour mold. And you're going to need a few things. I used some 2x4s because I had that for scrap, but you can use, according to this, you can use some 1x4 lumber. You're going to need an old piece of screen that you're going to need to wrap that around the bottom part of the mold. And then you're also going to need some eye hooks and latches because when you make the bottom portion of the mold, after you put the when you put the mold together, you need a way to secure that to each other, and you want that to be as tight as possible. So this is a basically example. Again, I use 2x4s because I happen to have that kicking around the house. You can use really whatever you want, and again, make the dimensions about 5 inches wide. That's the center dimension. On the boards on the outside, the longer boards, those will be 9 inches long. So that's how you do it. Again, you need a screen on the bottom that you're going to wrap, and then you need the eye hooks and latches there that you can see to kind of create this frame. Once you have that done, you're going to go on to step two. And basically what you do here is, like I said, I used, the first time I did it, I just went and took regular copy of paper, and I tore it into like 1-inch squares. And then I took it, put it in a bowl with some hot water, and let it steep there for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then once I did that, I transferred it to the blender. And when you blend it, you want to make sure that you blend it um, not too long, because you don't want to ruin the integrity of the fibers, but you need to blend it long enough that it kind of breaks everything up. I'll caution you with this is don't put too much in your blender. I made the mistake one time before that, put too much hot water and too much material in there, and when I turned the blender on, it kind of lifted the top off and made a bit of a mess. It's best to probably maybe use the bottom half of the blender, maybe about 2 inches high, and start with that first and see how you can always add a little bit more after. Something else I would do differently here too is you can take the hot water and the paper mixture and put it in the blender and let it steep in there first, and then you don't have to transfer it in. Just to understand, you can take a step out. the one of the variations you can do here as well is you can add the glitter, flowers, whatever you want. After you blend it, you can hand mix in some seeds or glitter or stuff. And this is where I would recommend you do it like the variation number two. You can also do it at the end, but sometimes it doesn't stick as well. And this way, if you did it here, it gets the um, variation of whatever you're putting in there throughout everything, and it kind of might work a little better. So it's kind of a trial and error thing here. So again, 1 inch squares, I let it soak in hot water, again, 15, 20 minutes. You could bypass this part and again, preload this all in the blender. Next step, after you've done this, and now it says here to, put your mold in a Rubbermaid container. I actually used my kitchen sink because it was made it small enough so it would fit in there, and I got a pretty good sized kitchen sink. Make sure the eye hooks are latched really good. And then what I did was I submerged the mold down in the water and I scooped in some of the paper pulp. And I kind of trial and error again. I put a couple big spoonfuls in there, and I used a big serving spoon. Put a couple big serving spoons of pulp in there. I kind of shook it, lifted it out, looked at it, and I figured, I could put a little bit more. So again, you're gonna kind of have to try to use your best judgment on this, and you'll again trial and error as you try this. So, and if you do enough, you'll have enough pulp to probably do a couple, maybe three of these if you when you decide or if you decide to do this. So again, trial and error. So you're going to pour some pulp into the mold, and then what you do is you kind of shake it back and forth to try to get it as even as possible. So as an example, they have a container and the mold is in there, and you can't see the bottom part of the mold. Again, you pour some in here, just kind of shake it around and get it as even as possible. Now you're going to unhook the latches. This is where we're going to cooch the sheet. You're going to unhook those eyelashes and lift the decal, the top part, off. And just be a little careful because you don't want the wet pulp or paper to come off. Now what you're going to do is you can take the interface, they call it, which is the sheet that you're going to use to help dry this. You're going to lay this across the top of that paper, and you're going to flip them over, and you see what's going to happen here. So you unlatch, you put the paper, now you flip it over, and I would recommend you do this on some sort of a tray with maybe another liner of paper underneath to get this down. And just the weight of that frame is going to help you, um, you know, this how to do the cooching of the sheet. And again, you see step one, take the top off. Step two, put the felt on it. Step three, you're going to flip the sheet in the frame over. Now you're going to take the sponge, and when you're doing the sponge portion, you're going to kind of just pat down that screen area. And what you're trying to do is just remove some of the excess water at this point. And and once you do that, you're going to take the frame, the bottom part, that decal part, and you're going to easily just peel that back because you don't want the wet pulp to stick to that. All right. So this is where you're going to try to take up as much as the excess water as you can. And you're going to probably have to rinse that, squeeze that sponge out a couple of times during this process because it's going to pull up a lot of water. Now you're going to dry the paper. And air drying works well. I did it a couple of different ways. The first time I did this, I took my paper, and after I got most of the water out of it, I took two sheets of cloth, put them together, and laid them out near a window that gets a lot of sun. So the sun would help dry it off. I had put a second tray on top of it just to kind of try to keep it as flat as possible, because if you don't do that or put some weight on it, the sheet's going to really curl up on you. You're not going to be able to use it. And again, it could take a day or two for this to do, depending on the humidity and how much you kind of let it sit in the sun too. So this is an example on the left-hand side of my first attempt at making paper. And you can see that the cloth I use there has a pattern in it, and the paper actually picked up the pattern of the cloth that I use. So if you can find a smooth cloth, you'll have smooth paper. If you don't find a smooth cloth, again, it's going to pick up the texture of the cloth that you're using, just like mine. I did do a book on the second go around when I did this. I did use a book, a couple books to keep the weight down, and that will work as well. Step seven, at this point, when prior to the sheet drying, so right after you um, put the weight on that to get some of this stuff dry, you can take, you know, cookie cutters or cups or different things and cut the paper into shapes. And I'm almost thinking that, I didn't do this, but the wetter the paper at this point, the easier it's going to be for you guys to use these cookie cutters and stuff. If you really get a lot of the water out, then try to cut through it. You may have trouble. So you might want to do the cookie cutter part of this if you're going to do shapes prior to it losing a lot of the water, because it'll be easier to get through. Then you can take the water out of it with the additional steps in drying. Okay. And then again, so they use butterflies here. Again, you can use cookie cutters of circles or squares or hearts or dragons or whatever. It's your call. Again, the variations of embedded items, you can use fabric, leaves. People put glitter. I did some that have some seeds in it, and the seeds are kind of cool because once it all dries out, you can take that paper and actually just bring it outside and put it in the dirt and water it, and the seeds will actually grow. So it is an option for you guys to do that as well. There's some examples of paper with some seeds in it. And again, like I said, you can plant those at a later date. I still have a couple sheets kicking around here that have the sheets with the seeds in it. I never planted it. A couple videos here that you're going to have to watch. The one on the left is the paper making process, and the one on the right is the basics of paper making. You're going to watch both of these both of these um, videos to get the names of the paper mills, so that you can answer the third part of this handout. This is a video that I'll put out there, and again, this shows all the processes of how I made the paper. The video will be available to you guys in the assignment to watch as well. Um, there are You're going to have to answer questions, right? And there's 3 sections. And in the first section of what are the 8 steps you made you would take to make your own paper at home. And again, if you went through this whole video, those are at the beginning of this video. Number 2, there's this paper model that I show you guys in the video of how to make your own paper. This is a model that my son and I made for a project that he did in school. And I explained to you what each section is. So A, B, C, D, E, and F. You got to watch that paper making video to get the answers for this section. And then again, the 2 paper mills that I just showed you a couple seconds ago, you got to watch those 2 videos to get the names of the 2 paper mills that you just watched on those 2 videos. All right. So that's it for this assignment. And I hope you enjoy it. It's something I particularly enjoy. Again, as I've told you before, I've spent a lot of time in the printing industry. I actually sold paper for a couple of years, and it was a pretty interesting experience. So if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to send me an email, rdion@gltech.org, or again, if we're in class, you can always just chime in during the Google Meet, and we can go from there. All right. So I appreciate it. Take care. Talk to you later.